My next Patreon question is from Joshua, who wants to know where I stand on excessive runtimes. I've seen some complaints towards certain movies for being too long. Other films, even some with much longer running times, have not been given those complaints. I'm wondering, in your opinion, what makes a movie too long? That's an interesting question. I've certainly seen and even made my fair share of comments criticizing a film for running too long, and it can be something that affects one's enjoyment of a film. Saturday Night Live even recently made a funny and entertaining sketch showing appreciation for short movies. I think one thing it usually comes down to is pacing. Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia runs 3 hours and 8 minutes, but does not feel like it at all. Anderson had to introduce and develop a lot of characters and plot lines in that film, and used his time really well in exploring them and how they all collide. He knew exactly when to cut and move to another part of the story, and use other techniques to make the pacing tight. Some of my other favorite films that run close to or over 3 hours include the first two Godfather movies, Amadeus, Schindler's List, My Fair Lady, The Return of the King, and Reds. I can put all of these on and be completely absorbed for the entire length. These were films that earned and warranted the long run times, while also being perfectly edited. I find editors to be underappreciated members of the filmmaking process, who are key in making sure the film they come together keeps the audience interested. However, I've also seen good movies that could be cut down a smidge. Judd Apatow is infamous for making movies that come close to or exceed 2 hours, with them not containing a lot of fat, usually involving his actors improvising. I like most of what he's done, but there's always a point where you start to want his films to get a move on. But he just really likes spending time with his characters, it seems. The one exception, interesting enough, is the 40-Year-Old Virgin, specifically the 160-minute theatrical cut. The scenes are paced well, the story is well structured, the lead character's arc is explored just enough, and the story wraps up at the right spot. But then there are other Apatow films I watch where, even the ones I like, I cannot help but think they need to be tighter. Films running too long is not just exclusive to ones over 2 hours. I've seen my fair share of boring 90-minute movies. One that immediately comes to mind is Bobbleheads the movie. Yes, I watched that. I was not even asked to. I did it on my own free will. It runs 82 minutes, but feels like it goes on for an eternity, as we get what feels like constant, endless scenes of those talking bobbleheads bobbling around. There's no natural flow between scenes, and it all makes the film an endurance test. Although in the case of bobbleheads, it's mainly because of how annoying the whole thing is. If the characters are irritating, you don't want to spend much longer with them, which also makes the film feel longer. There will also be movies you watch where scenes just come across as superfluous and don't do much to progress the story or characters. It will sometimes be in the middle act where you get these scenes, but I find it more noticeable during the third act. I've seen films where it looks like the characters' arcs are finished and the story is wrapping up, but then there's a surprising amount of time to go. Going back to Judd Apatow, Funny People is a notable example of this. For the first 80 minutes or so, it's a film about the relationship between Adam Sandler's veteran comedian and Seth Rogen's aspiring younger comic. There's a great movie there, and one that seems to reach its end around that 80-minute mark. But then we get an extra hour as the story starts to become about Sandler and his relationship with his ex-girlfriend. This is also a good movie and would have been great on its own, but it just feels strange to have it tacked onto this film about comedians. But at least Funny People is still overall a good film. Films can also run the risk of feeling repetitive at a certain point. Like a lot of people, I really enjoyed Everything Everywhere All at Once and found it a very creative, imaginative, and heartfelt film. But there is a point in its 2 hour and 20-minute runtime where it feels like it's repeating the same message about the mother-daughter relationship, even as they jump to a different part of the multiverse. There were a few times where I thought, okay, I get it. How many times do you really need to express this theme? I've also seen movies where the filmmakers had the perfect opportune shot to end on, and the story has come to an end, but there are still several minutes left to go. These are movies where it fades to black, it appears the end credits are going to roll, but nope, there's more, and the rest winds up completely unnecessary, and this annoys me every time. Of course, in the end, it also comes down to personal preference, what you find entertaining or boring, and that can also play a role in someone finding a movie too long. A lot of people think Return of the King has too many endings and should have started the credits earlier. I personally disagree with that. It's a 9-hour saga and they have a lot of characters' arcs to conclude, and I saw these as a nice way to say goodbye to the hobbits and elves and wizards we spent 3 movies with. I think Barry Lyndon is a stunning movie, but if somebody said it was boring, I would completely understand. That was even the view of a number of critics at the time. I think Ridley Scott's Alien is overall a well-made film, with many spooky aspects, but I do think there are parts where Scott lingers on shots too long, or spends too much time focusing on every single footstep taken by the characters. I understand he wanted to create the right atmosphere, but I do find myself feeling impatient in those scenes. On the other hand, I love 2001: A Space Odyssey and Blade Runner, movies other people have regarded as too long and too dull. Although, speaking of 2001, a quote I always remember from film critic Mark Kermode is one regarding the runtime of Sex and the City 2. He mentioned that the movie was about 146 minutes, which is about the same length as 2001. And in 2001, Stanley Kubrick goes from the birth of mankind to the birth of new species, which was basically him saying that that excessive runtime was unwarranted for what he felt was an empty, superficial comedy. So to conclude, I think it all comes down to pacing, how much you feel certain scenes added to the overall experience, and how invested you are in the characters. Although even good films can fall into the trap of having scenes that come across as tacked on. Thank you for your question, Joshua.